Welcome, students, to this next research study I'm calling America in Revolt. When we think of the American Revolution, we think about the brave statesmen and soldiers who put their lives on the line for liberty and freedom. We usually think about something like this: those brave men who battled the elements and an overwhelming enemy force to win our nation its independence. What we often overlook, though, is that American independence was won just as much by these people as by this literature. Something like Common Sense, a pamphlet published by Thomas Paine back in 1776. The war was won just as much by rhetoric as by muskets and cannon. Of course, the decision to revolt was made in the state houses and the halls of the provisional colonial government by a bunch of really intelligent, white-wigged American founders. It was their monumental task to organize the loosely affiliated colonies into one unified force, and they are ultimately the ones who bore the burden of making that terrifying decision to risk committing treason for what amounted to a political philosophy, something like the philosophy of John Locke, whom, did, like all philosophers, wrote without really practical application necessarily at the forefront of what they're writing, but more just to explore human ideas. So we have people risking their lives for a philosophy. So yes, all credit given to them. The decision to revolt was made by these by these well-respected, well-known statesmen and soldiers. But the case was made to the public by writers and speakers and authors. It was the job of writers of the day to convince the American people not just to resent, but hate the British Crown. Because when we resent something, we aren't really that apt to risk our lives in opposition to it. Writers and speakers of the day had to convince people to hate the British Crown so that they would actually form an armed revolt against it. They also had to convince potential militiamen to fight against what was at the time the most powerful military the world had ever known in the British Navy and Army. And finally, these speakers of the day had to keep up the fighting spirit of a people after numerous early war defeats. It's a very difficult task. So American independence was won just as much by talented speakers and authors as by brave statesmen and soldiers. So, what does all this have to do with the American identity? Remember, that's our unifying thread that runs throughout all of these research studies. The American identity, its characteristics, its origins, its contradictions. Well, what we have here at the time of the American Revolution was the birth of a new American character. Essayists, speechwriters, and pamphleteers all sort of worked together to sort of re-characterize the American citizen, who was already a sort of glorified folk hero at the time. But the American citizen was no longer just this hard-working, adventurous, independence-seeking individual. Now, the average American was a freedom fighter and a tyranny toppler, who fought not just for him or herself, but for all of mankind. So as you read today, I want you to look at the ways in which the speakers of the selections I've chosen use the available means of persuasion to sort of create this new American identity, this new American character that's not just the individuals who came over as colonists that worked hard to build up a nation from nothing, but who then were tested in the fires of war and ultimately fought not just for their own rights, but for the rights of future generations and all mankind. All right. Some key vocabulary from this for this research study. Start with treason. That's a good one. Treason, a violation of allegiance to one's sovereign or to one's state, as in to commit treason, like the American colonial army committed treason against the crown. Some related forms: treasonous, the adjective, and treasonously, the adverb. Next, insidious, an adjective. Stealthily treacherous or deceitful, as in an insidious enemy. And we have a couple more related forms: insidiousness and insidiously. Next, providence, the foreseeing care and guidance of God or nature over the creatures of the earth, as in I was saved by providence. We have a couple more forms for that: providential, the adjective, and providentially, the adverb. Next up, induce, the verb, to lead or move by persuasion or influence as to some action or state of mind, as in to induce a person to buy a raffle ticket, or in our context here, to induce the American people to rise up against the British. We have a couple related forms: inducible, the adjective, and inducement, the state of inducing, the noun. Next, supersede. To set aside or cause to be set aside as void, useless, or obsolete, usually in favor of something mentioned, to make something obsolete, to replace it with something else, as in they superseded the old statute with a new one. We have a couple related forms: supersedable and supersession, the state of superseding. Tumult. That is the violent and noisy commotion or disturbance of a crowd or mob, as in an uproar, either figurative or literal. As in the tumult reached its height during the premier's speech. And we have a couple related forms: tumultuous and tumultuously. Three more. Precipitate, the verb, to hasten the occurrence of, bring about prematurely, hastily, or suddenly, as in to precipitate an outcome. Have an adverb for that, precipitately. Gentry, the noun, the well-born and well-bred people, as in an upper or ruling class. Some form of aristocracy would be the gentry, as in the gentry disapproved of the commoner's demands. Then finally, self-evident. Self-evident's an adjective. It means evident in itself without proof or demonstration, or axiomatic, as in we hold these truths to be self-evident, as in they are immediately obvious without any sort of explanation, demonstration, or proof. All right, now for your reading list. I want you to start off with something that you looked at briefly in class: Patrick Henry's speech to the Second Virginia Convention, that famous "Give me liberty or give me death" speech. Then a first of a couple selections, three selections actually, by Thomas Paine. First, take a look at some excerpts from Common Sense, the famous pamphlet by Thomas Paine. And then a couple of different selections by his Crisis series, which is a series of articles he wrote while sort of embedded with Washington's troops, actually during the war. There's some really cool stories about him writing out these articles on the heads of drums by firelight to keep the American people kind of up to date on what was going on in the war. Then we have letters between one of America's most famous couples, John and Abigail Adams. John Adams, of course, would go on to be the second president of the United States. Abigail Adams, very savvy woman in a time where women weren't really listened to in the realm of politics, but became a sort of early voice for women's rights. And then lastly, can't let you go without reading the Declaration of Independence by Thomas Jefferson. You're going to hear a lot of the Locke influences in this declaration, especially with the premises that Jefferson provides up front. So that's it. Read these 6 texts, create your 8 dialogue journal entries, and I'll see you in class.